This is New York City. 8 million people. Over 800 languages spoken. The financial capital of the world. A place so iconic, so powerful, that it's simply known as the city. Every day, millions navigate its streets, ride its subways, chase their dreams in the shadow of its towers. This is the city that never sleeps. The city where, as they say, if you can make it here, you can make it anywhere. But 400 years ago, this island was covered in virgin forest. No skyscrapers, no millions, just hills, streams, and woodland inhabited by the Lenape people who had lived here for thousands of years. This is the story of how a small Dutch trading post became the capital of the world. A story of ambition, immigration, crisis, and reinvention. This is the story of New York. Before Europeans arrived, the island of Mannahatta, Island of Many Hills in the Lenape language, was home to Native Americans who had lived in the region for over 10,000 years. The Lenape weren't a single tribe, but a collection of communities who fished the abundant waters, hunted in the forests, and farmed the fertile land. They understood what made this place valuable. It sat at the mouth of a great river, with one of the finest natural harbors in the world. In 1524, Italian explorer Giovanni da Verrazzano became the first European to sail into New York Harbor, describing it as a very pleasant place situated amongst certain little steep hills. But he didn't stay. The real story begins in 1609, when English explorer Henry Hudson, working for the Dutch East India Company, sailed up the river that would bear his name. He was searching for a passage to Asia. What he found instead was something perhaps more valuable: abundant beaver, otter, and other fur-bearing animals. In Europe, beaver felt hats were the height of fashion, and the Lenape had access to more beaver than the Dutch could imagine. In 1624, the Dutch West India Company established a permanent trading post on the southern tip of Manhattan. They called it New Amsterdam. The first settlers numbered just 30 families, mostly Walloons, French-speaking Protestants fleeing persecution in what is now Belgium. They built a small fort where Battery Park stands today and began the fur trade in earnest. But this was no peaceful colonial idyll. Relations with the Lenape were tense from the start, sometimes erupting into violence. In 1626, the colony's director, Peter Minuit, conducted what became the most famous real estate transaction in history: the purchase of Manhattan Island from the Lenape for 60 guilders worth of trade goods, often misreported as $24 in beads. But this transaction was based on a fundamental misunderstanding. The Lenape didn't have a concept of private land ownership. They believed they were granting permission to share the land, not selling it forever. It was a clash of worldviews that would have tragic consequences for the indigenous people. New Amsterdam grew slowly. By 1650, there were only about 1,000 people living there. But it was diverse from the very beginning. A French priest visiting in 1643 reported hearing 18 different languages spoken in this tiny settlement. In 1653, worried about attacks from the English and Native Americans, the Dutch built a wooden wall along what is now Wall Street. The name remains, though the wall is long gone. Under Director General Peter Stuyvesant, a notoriously stubborn, peg-legged administrator, the colony became more organized. Streets were paved, a canal was dug along what's now Broad Street, and taverns multiplied. But in 1664, 4 English warships sailed into the harbor. England and the Netherlands were at war, and King Charles II had granted all Dutch territories in America to his brother, the Duke of York. Stuyvesant wanted to fight, but his outgunned, outnumbered colonists refused. Without firing a shot, New Amsterdam became New York. The Dutch would briefly recapture it in 1673, but by 1674 it was permanently in English hands. Under English rule, New York transformed from a sleepy trading post into a thriving colonial port. Its perfect natural harbor made it ideal for commerce. By 1700, the population had grown to about 5,000. The city sprawled north from the tip of Manhattan, but still occupied only the southernmost portion of the island. Trinity Church, established in 1697, became a focal point of colonial life. New York's economy boomed on the back of trade, both legal and morally abhorrent. The city became a major hub in the triangle trade: rum and goods to Africa, enslaved Africans to the Caribbean and American colonies, sugar and molasses back to New York. By 1750, New York had the largest enslaved population of any English colonial city north of Maryland. Nearly 1 in 5 New Yorkers was enslaved. This dark reality built much of the city's early wealth. When tensions with Britain escalated in the 1760s and 70s, New York was divided. Many wealthy merchants remained loyal to the crown, but radical groups like the Sons of Liberty pushed for independence. In 1776, just weeks after the Declaration of Independence was read to Washington's troops in what is now City Hall Park, the British attacked. The Battle of Long Island was a disaster for the Americans. Washington barely escaped with his army intact. For the next 7 years, New York was occupied by British forces. It became a refuge for loyalists from across the colonies. When the British finally evacuated in November 1783, 1/3 of the city's buildings had been destroyed by fires, but New York's finest hour was about to come. In 1789, George Washington was inaugurated as the first president of the United States on the steps of Federal Hall on Wall Street. For one brief, shining year, New York was the capital of the new nation. By 1790, the city had about 33,000 residents. It had lost the capital to Philadelphia, but it was about to begin the most explosive growth in human history. In 1811, city planners made a decision that would shape New York forever. The commissioner's plan imposed a rigid grid of streets and avenues over most of Manhattan. It was practical, efficient, and utterly unprecedented in its ambition. But what really transformed New York was a ditch. In 1825, the Erie Canal opened, connecting New York Harbor to the Great Lakes. Suddenly, goods from the entire American interior could flow through New York to the world. The effect was immediate and dramatic. By 1835, New York had surpassed Boston and Philadelphia to become America's largest, richest city. The port was jammed with ships. Money poured in, and so did people. Starting in the 1840s, waves of immigration began that would continue for nearly a century. First came the Irish, fleeing famine. Then Germans fleeing political upheaval. Then Italians, Jews from Eastern Europe, Chinese, Greeks. A flood of humanity unprecedented in human history. The population exploded. In 1800, 60,000 people. By 1850, 515,000. By 1900, 3.4 million. New York wasn't just growing, it was becoming one of the great cities of the world. But this rapid growth came with immense suffering. Immigrants crowded into tenements with no running water, no ventilation, no sanitation. Entire families lived in single rooms. Disease was rampant. The Five Points neighborhood became synonymous with poverty, crime, and desperation. In 1863, the Civil War brought New York's tensions to a boiling point. When the government instituted a draft that allowed wealthy men to buy their way out for $300, working-class New Yorkers, mostly Irish immigrants, rioted for 4 days. It was the deadliest riot in American history. Buildings burned, black New Yorkers were lynched, and over 100 people died. Yet through it all, the city kept growing. In 1858, work began on Central Park, an 840-acre oasis of green designed by Frederick Law Olmsted and Calvert Vaux. It was a revolutionary idea, public space for everyone, rich and poor alike. And in 1869, work began on an even more audacious project, the Brooklyn Bridge. For 14 years, workers labored to connect Manhattan and Brooklyn with the longest suspension bridge ever built. When it opened in 1883, it was hailed as the 8th wonder of the world. By the 1890s, New York faced a crisis. Too many people, not enough space. Manhattan is an island with natural limits. The city could expand north, but the most valuable land, the southern tip near the port, was completely built up. The solution came from two technologies: the elevator, perfected by Elisha Otis, and steel frame construction, which allowed buildings to rise higher than ever before. In 1889, the Tower Building became Manhattan's first skyscraper at 11 stories. Within 2 decades, buildings were reaching 30, 40, 50 stories into the sky. In 1898, New York made another leap. The 5 boroughs, Manhattan, Brooklyn, Queens, the Bronx, and Staten Island, consolidated into a single city. Overnight, New York became one of the largest cities on Earth, with 3.4 million people. In 1904, New York opened its subway system. The first line ran from City Hall to 145th Street. It was fast, efficient, and opened up vast areas of the city for development. Within 20 years, hundreds of miles of track would crisscross the 5 boroughs. But progress came with tragedy. In 1911, fire broke out at the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory in Greenwich Village. 146 workers, mostly young immigrant women, died, many jumping from windows to escape the flames. Doors had been locked to prevent theft. The horror shocked the nation and led to major labor reforms. The 1920s roared in New York like nowhere else. Prohibition turned the city into a playground of speakeasies and illegal clubs. Jazz poured out of Harlem. Flappers danced. Money flowed. Harlem became the cultural capital of Black America. The Harlem Renaissance produced some of the greatest artists, writers, and musicians of the 20th century. Langston Hughes, Duke Ellington, Zora Neale Hurston, Louis Armstrong. And the city raced upward. In 1930, the Chrysler Building briefly became the world's tallest at 1,046 feet. But a year later, the Empire State Building topped out at 1,354 feet, a record it would hold for 40 years. Workers sat on steel beams hundreds of feet in the air, eating lunch, building the sky. It was bold, brash, confident, everything New York believed itself to be. Then, on October 29, 1929, it all came crashing down. The stock market collapsed. Banks failed. By 1932, 1 in 4 New Yorkers was unemployed. Bread lines stretched for blocks. Homeless encampments called Hoovervilles sprang up in Central Park. The Jazz Age was over. The Great Depression had begun. World War II pulled America, and New York, out of the Depression. The city's factories, shipyards, and ports worked around the clock producing ships, weapons, and supplies for the war effort. When victory came in 1945, 2 million people flooded Times Square to celebrate, and New York emerged from the war as the most important city on the planet. In 1952, the United Nations established its headquarters on Manhattan's East Side. New York wasn't just America's capital. It was becoming the capital of the free world. The 1950s were New York's golden age. The city reached its peak population, 7.9 million in 1950. It was the undisputed center of finance, culture, media, and commerce. If you wanted to make it in America, you came to New York. But forces were already at work that would nearly destroy the city. Urban planner Robert Moses wielded more power than any elected official, building highways, bridges, and housing projects that reshaped New York. He was brilliant and ruthless. Entire neighborhoods were demolished to make way for expressways. The Cross Bronx Expressway alone displaced 60,000 people and cut the heart out of thriving communities. Moses built the bridges and highways that made suburban living possible. And white middle-class families began leaving the city in droves for new suburban developments in Long Island, Westchester, and New Jersey. At the same time, manufacturing was leaving. The factories and garment workshops that had employed hundreds of thousands of New Yorkers were moving to the South or overseas, chasing cheaper labor. The 1964 World's Fair showcased a confident, futuristic vision of New York. But even as visitors marveled at the exhibits in Queens, the city was beginning to hollow out. By the late 1960s, New York was in trouble. The middle class was fleeing. The tax base was shrinking, and the city's infrastructure, its subways, schools, hospitals, was falling apart from decades of deferred maintenance. The 1970s were the darkest decade in New York's modern history. Crime exploded. In 1970, there were 1,117 murders. By 1972, 1,691. Muggings, robberies, and assaults were epidemic. The subway became a rolling nightmare of graffiti and crime. In the South Bronx, landlords burned their own buildings to collect insurance money. The Bronx's burning became a national symbol of urban collapse. In 1975, New York nearly went bankrupt. The city was spending far more than it was taking in, and banks refused to lend any more money. Mayor Abe Beame went to Washington begging for a federal bailout. President Gerald Ford refused. The Daily News ran its famous headline, "Ford to City, Drop Dead." Eventually, a bailout was negotiated, but the city was placed under the supervision of an emergency financial control board. New York had lost control of its own finances. Thousands of city workers were laid off. Services were slashed. Subway maintenance stopped. Libraries closed. Garbage piled up. Fire stations shut down. Then, in July 1977, the city went dark. A massive blackout lasted 25 hours. In poor neighborhoods, widespread looting and arson broke out. Over 1,600 stores were damaged. More than 3,000 people were arrested. It was the summer of Son of Sam, a serial killer stalking young couples. It was also the summer of Studio 54, where celebrities partied while the city burned outside. Times Square became synonymous with crime, drugs, and prostitution. It was a place no tourist wanted to be after dark. By 1980, New York had lost over 800,000 residents in a decade. The city seemed to be dying. Many wondered if it could ever come back. But New York is nothing if not resilient. Slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, the city began to recover. Mayor Ed Koch, elected in 1977, brought energy and optimism back to City Hall. "How am I doing?" he would shout to crowds, and slowly the answer became better. Crime began to fall. The reasons are still debated. Better policing, changing demographics, the crack epidemic running its course. But by the late 1980s, New York was becoming safer. Wall Street roared back. The 1980s brought deregulation and a massive boom in finance. Young investment bankers made millions. The term yuppie, young urban professional, was born. Neighborhoods that had been dangerous and abandoned began to gentrify. Artists moved into cheap lofts in Soho and Williamsburg. They were followed by galleries, then boutiques, then wealthy residents who pushed out the artists who had pioneered the area. In 1994, Rudy Giuliani became mayor on a promise to make the city safer. His broken windows policing, cracking down on minor crimes like turnstile jumping and graffiti, was controversial, but crime dropped dramatically. By 2000, the murder rate had fallen by 70% from its 1990 peak. New York became one of the safest large cities in America, something unimaginable just 15 years earlier. Times Square was cleaned up, transformed from a den of vice to a family-friendly tourist destination. Some mourned the loss of the city's gritty character. Others were just relieved to walk the streets safely. The late 1990s brought the internet boom. Manhattan's Silicon Alley buzzed with startups. Young entrepreneurs raised millions with little more than an idea and a website. Then came September 11, 2001. At 8:46 in the morning, a hijacked airplane struck the North Tower of the World Trade Center. 17 minutes later, a second plane hit the South Tower. By 10:28 a.m., both towers had collapsed. 2,977 people were dead. It was the deadliest terrorist attack in history. New York mourned. The site became known as Ground Zero. Rescue workers searched through the rubble for weeks. The smoke didn't clear for months, but New Yorkers showed the world what resilience means. The day after the attack, the stock exchange vowed to reopen. Within weeks, Broadway shows were running. The city refused to be broken. Under Mayor Michael Bloomberg, the city rebuilt and modernized. Bloomberg, a billionaire businessman, ran the city like a corporation. Parks improved. Smoking was banned in bars. Bike lanes appeared. Gentrification accelerated. Brooklyn, once the butt of jokes, became cool. Williamsburg, Park Slope, and Dumbo filled with organic coffee shops, artisanal bakeries, and million-dollar condos. The High Line, an abandoned elevated railway transformed into a park, became an international sensation. Hudson Yards, the largest private real estate development in American history, rose on Manhattan's west side. The 2008 financial crisis hit New York hard. Wall Street nearly collapsed. Lehman Brothers failed. But the city weathered the storm better than many expected. By 2010, New York's population exceeded 8 million for the first time ever. The city was back, more expensive, more gentrified, more unequal than ever, but undeniably back. On October 29, 2012, Superstorm Sandy made landfall. It wasn't the strongest hurricane to ever hit New York, but it struck at the worst possible time, high tide during a full moon. Lower Manhattan went dark. Subway tunnels filled with salt water. Entire neighborhoods in Queens and Staten Island were destroyed by flooding. 43 New Yorkers died. The storm caused $19 billion in damage in New York City alone. It exposed an uncomfortable truth. New York, built on islands and surrounded by water, was extremely vulnerable to climate change. Sea levels around New York are rising faster than the global average. Storm surges are getting worse. What was once a once-in-500 years flood is now projected to happen every 25 years. The city began to adapt. Flood barriers, raised seawalls, and resilient infrastructure became priorities. But the question remained: could New York protect itself against the rising seas? In March 2020, COVID-19 hit New York harder than anywhere else in America. The dense, interconnected city that made New York great made it uniquely vulnerable to a pandemic. The city shut down. Times Square, usually packed with 300,000 people a day, was empty. Refrigerated trucks served as morgues outside hospitals. The sound of ambulance sirens was constant. By the end of April, over 18,000 New Yorkers were dead. Healthcare workers were overwhelmed. The city faced its worst crisis since 9/11, but New Yorkers showed up for each other. At 7 p.m. every night, people cheered for healthcare workers from their windows. Mutual aid networks delivered food to the vulnerable. The city endured. Vaccines arrived. The city slowly reopened. But COVID changed New York in lasting ways. Remote work became permanent for many industries. Office buildings sat empty. Some wealthier New Yorkers left for the suburbs, just as they had in the 1970s. Crime ticked up. The subway, once again, felt unsafe to many. The city's budget faced enormous pressures as tax revenue from offices and tourism evaporated. Yet by late 2021, restaurants were packed again. Broadway reopened. Tourists returned. New York, as always, refused to stay down. Today, in 2026, New York City stands at another crossroads. With 8.3 million people, it remains America's largest city and one of the most important cities on Earth. But it faces challenges that will define its future. The most pressing issue is housing. The median rent for a one-bedroom apartment in Manhattan exceeds $4,500 a month. Teachers, nurses, service workers, the people who make the city run, can barely afford to live here. New York simply hasn't built enough housing to meet demand. Restrictive zoning laws, neighborhood opposition to new development, and the high cost of construction have created an acute shortage. Homelessness has surged to levels not seen since the 1980s. Over 90,000 people sleep in shelters every night. Thousands more live on the streets or in the subway. Gentrification continues to transform neighborhood after neighborhood. Harlem, once the capital of Black America, is now majority white in many areas. Longtime residents are pushed out by rising rents. The subway system, built mostly over a century ago, struggles to meet modern demands. The Second Avenue subway finally opened its first phase in 2017, after nearly 100 years of planning. But much of the system is aging and overcrowded. Chronic delays frustrate millions of daily riders. The MTA faces a massive maintenance backlog and funding challenges. In 2024, New York became the first American city to implement congestion pricing in Manhattan. Drivers pay a fee to enter the central business district. The policy is controversial, but aims to reduce traffic and fund transit improvements. Major infrastructure projects are underway. Penn Station, long considered one of the worst transit hubs in America, is being completely redesigned. The cost, over $7 billion. Climate change is no longer a distant threat. It's a present reality. Sea levels around New York have risen 9 inches since 1950 and are accelerating. The city is building coastal flood barriers, raising critical infrastructure, and designing neighborhoods to absorb water like sponges rather than channeling it into the subway. Heat is another challenge. Urban heat islands make New York summers deadly, especially for the poor and elderly. The city is planting trees, creating green roofs, and opening cooling centers. But the math is daunting. Even with aggressive action, parts of Lower Manhattan, the Rockaways, and coastal areas of Brooklyn and Queens could be regularly flooded by 2050. New York's economy is transforming. The pandemic proved that many office jobs can be done remotely. Office vacancy rates have soared to over 20% in Manhattan, the highest ever recorded. But the city is adapting. Tech employment has grown significantly. Life sciences, biotech, pharmaceuticals, medical research is booming. The Cornell Tech campus on Roosevelt Island symbolizes this shift. Tourism has recovered to near pre-pandemic levels. Over 60 million visitors come to New York each year,